It's your boy, the Dread Mogul, and I'm back with another episode to let y'all know about credit. Yeah, this is about credit again. Another episode about credit again. And we're going to talk about credit, finances, anything that has to do with taking our life to the next level and, getting what we need to getting where we want to go in life. You know what I'm saying? So, if you're interested in that, just tune in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. There'll be plenty of videos coming out in the future. But today we're going to talk a little bit about what credit score do you use? What credit score do you use? There's a bunch of different scores out there. There's a bunch of different things out there. You never know what your real score is. They make things real confusing out there. So I'm hopefully, this is all, again, my opinion based, but hopefully this is going to clarify some of this stuff up and kind of give you a gauge of the risks that you're going to have to take, as well as, educating yourself enough to where you can make moves, you know what I'm saying? So let's just get to the point. So most banks, obviously, Credit Karma has a Vantage score that they use. Vantage score is just another scoring model that the banks, or not the banks, but the third party credit issuer uses from the credit bureaus. It's called a Vantage score. And then there's a FICO score. A lot of people say, oh, well, a Vantage score ain't real. FICO's better than Vantage. Now, they're kind of right and they're kind of wrong, because FICO scores are used, which is a FICO score is pretty much a score that is generated. It's kind of like a Vantage score that is used and generated to create your cumulative score, what your total score is. So it's called a FICO score. And so the reason why FICO score is so heavily weighed over Vantage is because so many banks, they use FICO scores. They don't use Vantage scores. Some banks do, though. Some banks use Vantage scores. That's why I say, they're kind of right, they're kind of wrong. Most banks you walk into, they're going to use a FICO score. They're not going to use a Vantage score. They're going to use a FICO score, right? So that's why they'll say, oh, Vantage score is crap, blah, blah, blah. But more and more banks are starting to use Vantage scores. You can look it up as well. You can go on VantageScore.com. You have to check the link. But you go on those websites, and a lot of banks, so in a sense, you have to call and ask the bank, do you guys do FICO score or Vantage score? That's kind of one of the first questions that you want to ask when you go to the bank. FICO or Vantage? And typically, though, they'll say FICO is what 95% of issuers are going to use. But Vantage score, don't knock Vantage score, though, because Vantage score could get you in the ballpark of where you want to be. Is that the end all be all? You still want to run your FICO to get, the official one before you go to the bank. But Vantage score will also get you in the ballpark and kind of give you an idea of where you're at. And you can still make moves by looking at your Vantage. So now the next step would be is figuring out when you go to try to get approved, right? Because now we're trying to figure out how to get ourselves approved and figure out what score we need to use to make ourselves the most eligible, right? So the next thing you want to ask them is, which bureau do you guys pull from? So now, this is kind of a thing that's a little confusing to most people, but some banks do it, some banks don't do this. But most banks, they pull from a certain bureau, which pulls from all three bureaus. But they go through a certain, because like I said, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. Those are three consumer credit bureaus. And so some banks, they pull through certain, each bureau has their own score. So some banks pull through TransUnion, some banks pull through Equifax to get all three, and some pull from Experian to get all three. So you have to look and ask them, hey, for example, hey, bank, what bureau do you pull through? They say Experian. So then you know that Experian is going to pull a score, which is a cumulative score of all three bureaus, right, together. So if you know that you need to focus, if that bank is the bank you want to go through, you know that you got to focus on that Experian credit score, because that Experian credit score is the one that's going to most likely get you approved or not approved. Vice versa. You can't get your Experian hella high, and then you go use your TransUnion, and then the TransUnion one is pulled to find out all three, and TransUnion cumulative score is lower than your Experian. So then your chances and your likelihood of getting approved for that loan or for that credit line is going to be weaker, because you're using TransUnion, your TransUnion score is smaller, if that makes sense. So, but some banks, they pull from all three. Now, technically, it's like an all three pull, but like I said, they go through a certain issuer, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. That's why all three of them have a different score, which is a cumulative score, if that makes sense. So, call your bank. Hey, what credit bureau or bank, what credit bureau do you guys pull through? And they'll tell you, Experian. Oh, we do our credit checks through Experian. We do our credit checks through Equifax. We do our credit checks through TransUnion. And then that will kind of give you a ballpark. Okay, I need a, like if TransUnion your highest one, not saying to neglect the others, but you definitely want to go harder on disputing, getting the utilization down, and going after that TransUnion score. So that way your TransUnion will say a higher score. Now, this is where it gets really, really, really confusing, right? Because you go in the bank and you'll say, okay, my credit score is 680. And the bank will go in there and you'll go, or you'll say, no, actually you'll say your score is a 640. Let's say, for example, my score is a 640. You go in the bank and the bank will tell you, oh yeah, we run through Experian, we use FICO. So you go to the bank and then they say, oh, well, your score is actually a 660. And you're like, a 660, but on here it says a 640. Now, this is where it gets really, really confusing and really, really, really interesting. If you go to your Experian app, let's say, for example, I'll put it up there if I can. I'll put it up there and kind of show you. On your Experian app, they have scoring models within your score. So, like, for example, if you have a 640 credit score in Experian, and then you go ahead and you click on the score and you scroll down, right? It'll have different scoring models, which within that score, they have different scores on the scoring model. So like they'll have so you have a 640, it shows right here, on your top, they'll say you have a 640, but then you scroll down, they have a scoring model 8, scoring model 2, a scoring model 3, a scoring model 4, a scoring model 6. They have different FICO scoring models within that score. So, you know what I'm saying, that have different scores. So if, for example, if they say you have a 667, then you would go ahead and turn around and you would go look at what scoring model they used. You understand what I'm saying? So if they had a 640, bang, if they had a 640 and they say you had a 667, you want to go on that scoring model and you want to look what scoring model did they use. Because they won't tell you. That's the thing about the underwriters. They won't, typically, from my experience, they won't tell you what scoring model they use. So you have to run that inquiry to kind of find out what model do they use, if that makes sense. So when you go out there and don't go with the 640, score, I think that's the end all be all, even if you're using your FICO. Because at the end of the day, it could be lower, it could be higher, depending on what scoring model they use within that score, if that makes sense. So you can go in there and now the scoring model says 667, and now you know what scoring model they use for next time. Or if you get denied, you know what scoring model you need to use. So even if it says on the top, it says, oh, you have a 640. If you go down to your scoring model, you know they do a scoring model 2. Like, for example, my bank, they do a scoring model, FICO scoring model 2 within that model. So I know that even if my score says this amount, I want to go look at that scoring model 2, and I want to see what that scoring model 2 says on my score. So then you'll be like, okay, if my scoring model 2 says this, but my total score says this, then most likely I'm not going to get approved because my scoring model 2 says I'm at a 600. If that makes sense. So you got to look at the scoring models and it will tell you exactly what scoring model you're used for. Now, at the end of the day, you can do all this check mark. Your utilization could be right. Your score could be right. Everything could be right for you and everything could work right for you. At the end of the day, though, it's going to come down to that underwriter. It's going to come down to that underwriter. It's going to come down to the underwriter saying yes or no based off of this. You get this much based off that. So you could have everything right. But the underwriter still comes back. The underwriter typically, if you know what underwriter is, you go to your banker. The banker is the middleman, pretty much. Links you. He's the middleman between you and the underwriter. They're really, I don't understand it, but they're really, really sensitive about an underwriter. And they're really sensitive about, what you know, what information they give out and what information they don't give out. But one thing that you want to check though is you kind of have to run that hard inquiry to find out what that credit score is, to find out what scoring model they use, because they won't tell you the scoring model. So it's kind of like the banker's a middleman. Once I said before, the banker's a middleman, and he communicates with the underwriter. So the underwriter and the banker has really no control. So the banker is going to tell you yay or nay. The underwriter is going to tell them yay or nay, and why, and what, you know. Like one time I got approved for a line of credit, and I got approved for a certain amount, and they told me, I said, why can I get a greater amount? And they said that they didn't want to give me a greater amount because I didn't have enough age on my credit history to get the bigger amount. So it's kind of like it's like you can have everything right, all the ducks in a row, and still there's going to be something that says, oh, well, da 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 da. So I don't want to drag off this video too long though, but this is your boy Dread Mogul. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. And if you like the video, man, let me know something, and I'll get back to you. All right then, man. Peace.